We'll begin. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
We'll just give a quick introduction.
Okay.
Sorry. His Grace Navina Nirada Prabhu is a disciple of His Holiness Radhanath Swami Maharaj, long-time book distributor. So we are very fortunate to have him association today. We'll hear from him Ram Katha today. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for having me. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Obirana Vallabha Girivaradhari Obirana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yasodhanandana Pradadana Ranjana Yasodhanandana Pradadana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Sitaram Jayo Sitaram 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 Sitaram Jaya Sitaram Sitaram Jayo Sitaram Sitaram Jaya Sitaram Raghupati Raghava Rajaram Patita Pavana Sitaram Raghupati Raghava Rajaram Patita Pavana Sitaram 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 Jaya Sitaram 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 Jaya Sitaram Sitaram Jaya Lakshman Hanuman Sitaram Jaya Lakshman Hanuman Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Gurudev, 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 Jai Jai Gurudev, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol. Jai Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya Satara Satasi Simati Ranika Swami Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktanta Swamiraj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Shri Radha Govinda Dev Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bo. All glories to some devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to some devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to some devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Namah Vishnu Hare Krishna Krishna Bhutale Srimati Radha. Tarine. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Narayanam namaskritya naranjayva narottamam devim sarasatim vyasam tato jaya mudirayet. Nasta priyeshu badreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki tarajastamo bhava kamalo badayaschaye chetayatairana vidam sitvam sattve prasidati. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 9th Canto, 10th chapter. Text number 2. Tasyapi Bhagavan Esha Sakshat Brahma Mayo Hari Ashankshena Chaturdhagat Putratvam Prartita Surai Rama Lakshman Bharata Shatrugna Iti Sangyaya. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktanta Swami Prabhupada. Being prayed for by the demigods, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth Himself, directly appeared of His expansion and expansions of the expansion. Their holy names were Ram, Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrugna. These celebrated incarnations thus appeared in 4 forms as the sons of Maharaj Dasarath. Purport. Lord Ramachandra and his brothers, Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrugna, are all Vishnu Tattva, not Jiva Tattva. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expands into many, many forms. Advaitam, Achyutam, Anadim, Anantarupam. Although they are one and the same, Vishnu Tattva has many forms and incarnations. As confirmed in Brahma Samhita 539, Ramadi Murtishu Kalani Amena Tishtan. The Lord is situated in many forms, such as Ram, Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrugna. And these forms may exist in any part of His creation. All these forms exist permanently, eternally, as individual personality of Godhead. And they resemble many candles, all equally powerful. Lord Ramachandra, Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrugna, who being Vishnu Tattva are all equally powerful, became the sons of Maharaj Dasarath in response to prayers by the demigods. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gnanjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupagadam Hayam Dadati Swapadantikam Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sri Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yat Kripadamaham Vande Sri Gurudinotaranam Paramananda Madhavam Sri Chaitanyeshwaram Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripasinduvevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on Srimad Bhagavatam. The first astounding teachings that we get here from this verse is that Ram, Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrugna are all Vishnu Tattva, so they're all equally powerful. Yet we can see that they assume distinct forms, individual forms, to play different roles in this pastime. In order to create rasa, you need variety. If everything is the same, then there is no rasa. And that's why in drama, there has to be a hero, there has to be a pretty girl, there has to be a villain, there has to be all these different characters. Otherwise, there will not be the difference of relationships and the different flavors, the different rasas, the different experiences that are being created. Krishna is known as Rasa Bihari. He is the embodiment of all rasa, of all transcendental mellows, all transcendental bliss. Thus, he is showing how to be a perfect husband, a perfect father, a perfect son, and a perfect friend, and a perfect brother. Now, what's really astounding here is that even though all the four brothers were Vishnu Tattva, they agreed to play their part in order to manifest this pastime. Just like Lord Ram, he was the king and he embodied the supreme king. And his brother Lakshman, even though he was Vishnu Tattva also, he served him and he assisted him in that capacity. Of course, we know that in later incarnation, he chose to appear as the older brother, as Balaram, because as Lakshman, he sacrificed and suffered quite a bit in order to serve Lord Ram. And in the next time around, he chose to appear as the older brother, and still he served Krishna in different capacities. But that brings out the flavor, that brings out the rasa. So the teachings for us is that the name of the game in Kali Yuga is Sankirtan, Sankirtan Yagya, Samyak Kirtan, which means the congregational chanting of the holy name. There will be a leader, there will be responders, there will be people who play kartals, people who play drums, there will be dancers, there will be people who are carrying flags and torches, etc., etc. So it is a team effort. Now, whatever role we are capable of playing, we should assume that role in a service mood for the pleasure of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, for the pleasure of Sri Radha and Krishna. That is the lesson that we can learn here, that it's not that I have to be number one, otherwise I can't really be satisfied. In fact, anybody who takes part in this Sankirtan Yagya becomes satisfied because this Yagya is complete and it is declared by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself to be a success. Yagyai Sankirtana Prayayre Jantihi Sumedasa Parambrijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtan. He has himself declared that anyone who is intelligent will engage in this Sankirtan, and that this Sankirtan movement is already declared a success by the Supreme Lord himself. Now, as a perfect king, he's holding court every day, and he's giving the opportunity to the citizens to see him, to get darshan, and to get counsel, and to get justice. This is another important lesson, that if you want to be a leader, you have to be available and accessible to your people. You cannot be remote, be a few states away, or just manage through a phone or through emails, but you have to be there on the ground, and you have to hear the concerns and be able to deal with them. Responsibility means the ability to respond adequately. If a person doesn't have the ability to respond adequately, they're not supposed to be in a position of authority. So Lord Ram, every day, he would hold court. And citizens came, citizens of all walks of life, not just very important people, but common people. And they could get swift justice in a very timely manner, which nowadays is a thing of impossibility unless you have money. And even if you have money, it may take a very long time. Just like in India, we know if you want justice, maybe your great-grandson will receive a verdict, but it is not possible to resolve cases in a very timely manner due to the current state of affairs. But Lord Ram, daily he would hold court And whatever cases came, he would deal with them and he would solve them. He would settle them. So the court servant went out and went to see if there was any more people. It was already nearing the end of the time allotted for this type of activity. And he saw a dog was sitting outside. And the dog was talking and said, I want to see Lord Ram. Now, the servant became a little puzzled. There is a speaking dog here, but he wants to see Lord Ram to get justice. So he asked and he was told, bring him in. So the dog came and the dog presented its case. The dog said that I have been mistreated by a certain Brahmin, by a Pujari, who kicked me and who threw rocks at me. And I am bleeding and I feel very much aggrieved. And I want to present this case before Lord Ram. So he did so. Lord Ram heard him. And he had called for the Brahmin also and heard the Brahmin side, which shows that a proper leader, he is giving everybody the opportunity to present their case. And then with proper consultation, he comes to a conclusion. So the Brahmin said, yes, it is true. I was on my way to the temple to perform my deity worship. And there this dog crossed my path. And I was very afraid and to not become contaminated by the dog. So I kicked him and then I threw rocks at him just to make him go away. It is a fact. So Lord Ram asked the dog, what do you think should be the proper punishment for this Brahmin? Which is also very interesting, that a proper leader is not just shooting from the hip, but is actually seeing what is adequate according to the Dharma Shastras and also to the situation, time, place, and circumstances. What will satisfy the other party? So the dog said, I would like him to become the Mahant, the head priest in the temple, in the mat. And I would like him to be the Acharya. So everybody was a little surprised. They thought, what is this? This is not a punishment. This is more like a promotion. He will become the main guy. He will become the Acharya. So they were a little puzzled. And so the dog said, and then he was asked, why such kind of a punishment? He said, because in my last lifetime, I was the Mahant. I was in charge of the Mat. I was the Acharya. So lessons to be learned from this story, manifold. Some we already explained, but that we should not be ambitious to gain power or to gain a position, even if it's for the service of the Lord. But we should be in a detached mode of service, selfless service. And when there is appointment and revelation, when Krishna forces us to take up certain roles, then we can do so according to our capacity, but we have to remind ourselves that it has to be done always in the mood, in the spirit of service. Otherwise, it can become counterproductive. Just like Lakshman, he sacrificed. He did not sleep when they were in exile. He would guard Sitaram every night, so he would not sleep. He would not close one eye because he was fully dedicated to the service of Lord Ram. This shows the example of abnegating one's own pleasure, satisfaction, and sense gratification for the service of the Supreme. Lord Ram himself was extremely sensitive to the needs of his citizens and also to the needs of his brothers. When he was in exile, before returning, he asked that when you bring this message to Bharat that I will return, please see how he reacts. And if he is the least disturbed, then I will stay in exile. I will not go and cause any trouble, any pain to my brother. So that was his relationship, his mood that he had with his brothers. Lord Ram declared that any living entity who once said, Ram, I'm yours, I will give them shelter. I will protect them and I will forgive their sins. So when Vibhishan appeared on the scene, he came and he was accompanied by some of his associates. And he went just before Ram crossed the bridge, and he took shelter of Ram. So a lot of the monkey generals, they were very apprehensive. They said, he's a bad guy. He's coming from the enemy's camp. He's Ravan's brother. He cannot be trusted. He should be killed immediately. But Ram did not come to a hasty decision, but he asked, Hanuman, what is your opinion? And Hanuman said, I can see that there is no envy in this person. He is virtuous and he's very much dedicated to you. So I think he can be trusted. So Ram addressed Vibhishan as Lankeshwar, as the ruler of Lanka. And he had him coronated. He anointed him. He addressed him and he dealt with him like the king of Lanka. Then people asked Ram, but what if Ravan comes and surrenders to you? You have already given Lanka to Vibhishan. What will you give Ravan? And he said, I will give Ravan Ayodhya. And then what about Bharat? He's supposed to, he's the king, he's the ruler of Ayodhya right now. If you give Ravan, Ayodhya, then what will you give Bharat? He said, I will give him Vaikuntha. I will give him my own abode. And they asked, what about you? He said, I'm fine. I'm okay. Which is a very important lesson, that if you want to be a leader, you have to be self-satisfied. Not just samtushta, not just, okay, I'm fine, but atmarama. Atmaramas chamunayo nirgrantam abhyukrame kurvanti mahaitu kim bhaktim itam bhuto gunohari. This verse that was beautifully elaborated upon by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu on different occasions in many explanations, that one has to find satisfaction in one's own spiritual practice. As long as we are still looking for validation, for pleasure, for happiness, for approval on the mundane sphere, on the material sphere, we will always be disappointed. Why? Because the mundane sphere is limited and it will never be sufficient. It will never be adequate. We can see, even though people get so many likes and they get so much money and they get so much power and influence, still they're not satisfied. They can't get satisfaction, because satisfaction only comes from Atma. When we're Atma Rama, when we're satisfied in the true self, in the spiritual self, because of devotional service to Krishna, then we can be satisfied in any situation. And Lord Ram showed that in his own life. He was satisfied in the forest. Why? Because he knew that he was following the order of his superior authority. He was happy carrying out the wishes of his father. That gave him satisfaction, that he was upholding Dharma. Even though it was uncomfortable, even though it was an inconvenience, he was in the forest for 14 years. It's certainly a long time. It is stated that 14 years is considered a full cycle. So even if somebody has done something wrong, not that Ram did anything wrong, but even if somebody has done something wrong, if after 14 years we even remember what they have done, then we are guilty of that same sin. You get it? Which means that after 14 years that something has happened, we should not even remember that, nor hold it against, especially if a person has atoned and has righted the wrongs. So these are all different lessons from the Ramayana. Of course, Hanuman is embodiment of a surrendered servant who has dedicated his life and soul for the pleasure of his worshipful Lord. So much so that he is ready to take on any service and any role in order to please his worshipful Lord. One time, Hanuman saw Sita Devi, and she had sindur. She had put the vermilion in the parting of her hair. So he asked, what is that? And she said that this is a sign of my love and devotion to Ram. And It makes Ram very happy to see that. So Hanuman went and he bathed in sindoor. He became completely red. And that's why in many temples, Hanuman is worshipped in this red or orange form, because he thought, if this makes Ram happy, if this gives pleasure to Ram, then I should put this all over my body. Mm-hmm. So he also showed that when we perform devotional service, it is not about a matter of sophistication. It is not a matter of technical proficiency, but it is a matter of the heart. It is a question of our sincerity and the purity of our love. One time, Sita Devi offered a pearl necklace to Hanuman, and he accepted it and he chewed on it, because that's what monkeys do. They chew on things. So, but because of the simplicity of his love and his dedication, he was always giving great pleasure and joy to Sita and Ram, their worshipful lords. So Lord Ramachandra, his reign was undisputed, and he ruled in accordance with his brothers. So he had his brothers instated to take charge of different affairs, and yet his ministers, his council. So he showed to us what is the exemplary life of a leader. A leader is not an egomaniac. He's not a person who thinks that only I can do this, no one else can. Ram was in exile for 14 years, but Bharat was ruling on behalf of Ram. He took Ram's shoes, his padukas, his wooden shoes, slippers, and he put them on the throne. And he himself was sitting on the floor, and he was worshiping those slippers for 14 years. He was only eating barley cooked in cow urine, a very frugal and a very rudimentary diet, because his life was meant for the service of Ram. Yet he ruled perfectly because he was simply interested in fulfilling Ram's desire. So the expertise of a leader is being seen of what happens when he's not present. So even though Ram was not physically present in the kingdom because of his expansions, therefore everything was going on perfectly, which shows to us that if we want to grow the Sankirtan movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we have to be team players, and we have to be willing to play whatever role is required for the service of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sangha Pango Parshadam. There is associates, there is expansions, there is empowered personalities, there is ordinary people, but who are taking the role of servants. So all of them together are cooperating very nicely for the service of Yagyeshwar, the Supreme Lord, through the performance of this Sankirtan Yagya. Yesterday we were in Washington Square Park, and we saw there was the Harinam going on, the chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Some devotees were distributing books. Some devotees were playing instruments. Everyone was chanting. Some were giving out flyers and invitation cards. There was 3 book tables, and a lot of people got the mercy. A lot of people became affected by this very tasteful, very attractive presentation of Krishna consciousness. So it takes a team effort. It is good if people meet one devotee and they get connected. They get the seed of Krishna bhakti. Yet oftentimes it requires a consistent effort, multiple encounters before a person really fully becomes convinced about the message of Krishna consciousness. One time I was in the Ukraine, and I took a night train from Kiev to Donetsk, and to two strongly built men came into the train. They had shaved heads and strong necks and shoulders, and they had tattoos on their necks. So they looked quite intimidating. And one came right up to me, right in my face, and he asked me, "Da Krishnait," which means, are you a Hare Krishna? And I didn't know what to answer because not sure how he will respond. But somehow I felt it was the right thing to do. And I said, "I'm a Hare Krishna, yes." And he said, "Thank you very much for giving this knowledge to all the people." So he already had books and he appreciated the message. So then there and then in the train, he took more books and he contributed, and he asked me, well, how to chant Hare Krishna. So we had a little japa workshop there on the train, and I showed him how to chant on beats. And actually him, his wife, and their son, and his mother, and a friend, they were staying in the compartment just right next to ours. So, and I was thinking, oh, okay, he got books, he got the chanting, he needs to get prasadam. But I don't have any prasadam because I'm on a night train. Why should I have prasadam? But then I remembered that the devotees in Kiev had given me a huge bag with Mahaprasadam. And I thought initially, why are they giving me this prasadam? Are they thinking I'm going to sit there all night and eat Maha? But always remember that if never refuse prasadam. It may not be for you. You may just be the person who carries it, who brings it. Just like Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he sent Damodar Pandit to Navadvip to take care of the devotees there and to give pleasure to his mother by bringing good news from Lord Chaitanya. And he gave him a lot of prasadam packaged to please his mother and the devotees in Navadvip. So I remembered I had that bag of prasadam. So the next morning I knocked on their compartment and the door opened and there was beer bottles and unmentionable things. Yet I brought them the Mahaprasad, and when they saw there was samosas and sweet balls and cake, they became very excited, and immediately they appreciated and they honored this prasadam. And then we arrived in Donetsk, and it was early morning, and it was raining, and it was around freezing, just slightly above freezing, maybe 2 or 3 degrees Celsius, or maybe 35 degrees Fahrenheit. And the devotees were not there to pick me up. So we were just waiting outside, and it was raining. And after 5 or 7 minutes, I saw maybe 10 minutes, the devotees came running through the train station. Maybe they were delayed, maybe they went to the wrong place. So they came over and they gave me this huge garland. The garland was this thick of Prabhupada. And just as they came, that family came out of the train. And I took the garland. The grandmother was holding the boy on her shoulder, was carrying the baby boy. He was maybe 3 years old. So I put the garland on the boy, and the whole family was happy, and we parted. And that evening, that man, he came to the temple in Donetsk, and he attended Gora Arti. He attended a Bhagavad Gita class, Sankirtan seminar. And afterwards, he came up to me and he said, now my family is convinced about Krishna consciousness. So it is good that we distribute books, but it's not enough. It's good that we distribute prasadam, but it's not enough. It's good that we do Harinam, but it's not enough. Unless and until we are ready to spend quality time with people, to answer their question, to counsel them, to guide them in their spiritual practice, it will be taking very long time before a person can actually take up the process. So we have to be available and accessible for guiding people in Krishna consciousness, and that will convince them that we actually care about them. Because if we only care about people because they buy things from us or because they participate in our programs, then how much do we actually care? But if we understand that this is our sacred duty, this is our dharma, we are meant to serve in this capacity. We are ambassadors. we are representatives of the Guru Parampara, then we can become empowered. Krishna Shakti Vinana Hetara Pravartan. This potency can be embodied in any living entity that agrees to serve in that capacity. Sometimes devotees have this understanding or this misunderstanding that all the cool things happened pre-77 or pre-75 or pre-72 or 68, depending on how what group you're in. But actually, that shows the misunderstanding, because if we understand parampara, we know that the further remote you are, the further removed you are from Krishna, the more nectar you get, because you get all the realization of all the previous devotees in that line. So that is our Gaudiya Vaishnava theology. So we should read and study and discuss the books that we distribute and make plans how we can apply them in our lives, how we can create communities, so that when people come, their only question in mind will be, how can we become like you? How can we be part of your group? That should be their only question. Not, oh, where can I get a little more samosa for a little less price? Of course, those people will also be there, and they will hop around, they will shop around from group to group till their false ego is pampered and satisfied. But we cannot cater to these mundane whims, because Krishna consciousness is not a popularity contest. Of course, we're not trying to upset people, yet at the same time, we cannot just be crowd pleasers. Otherwise, you will end up dancing naked on the table, and even that will not be satisfying. So we have to know that by watering the root of the tree, we're actually satisfying all the parts and parcels. So these are some reflections and some teachings from the Ramayana. I'd like to open up for questions, comments, or discussion.
Krishna, dear devotees, anyone has questions? Okay, Amritan, go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, please accept my humble obeisance. All praise to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhu. Very nice examples, easy to follow, that we'd be able to adopt in a great day life. Prabhu, I have two questions. The first one is, you mentioned about the 14-year cycle. It should be forgotten. And anyone who does remember it is guilty of that same transgression. How does this connect with history repeats itself? And that's why we need to study history, so that we don't make that same mistake.
Yes, we certainly study history so not to make the same mistakes, but we do not bear any grudges. We do not bear any ill feelings towards a person who may have committed transgressions, but has redeemed themselves. Or as Jesus says, hate the sin, but not the sinner. Otherwise, if we keep on throwing rocks, then who will be spared? Who of us is free from sin? Who is free from transgression? So that is something to consider. That doesn't exclude that we should not study history and try to learn from these situations and try to, not just individually, but also collectively, avoid such kind of situations. There has to be due diligence. We can't just say everything's fine and let whatever happens and let people have to deal with their own karma. Especially leaders who are in positions of authority have to ensure that the people under their care are properly cared for and protected. And that means also to weed out mistakes and to, at times, try to admonish or rectify or remove culprits who are having behavior that is destructive. So that goes hand in hand. But it's not that when we see a person, we remember, oh yeah, 20 years ago, he stole my rasgulla, you know, and now for eternity he's in the doghouse, and we we become upset, even though that person has apologized, has given us a gift, has tried to mend themselves. This is just an example. Of course, there are certain crimes that are unforgivable, but we have to also see, am I the person who is in a position to administer judgment, to administer punishment or not? One time I was with Hridayananda Maharaj, and we were discussing different philosophical and also preaching and organizational issues. And I was bringing up certain points where I saw that there was a lot of room for improvement. In fact, quite some hiccups. And we had a discussion for quite a while. And then Maharaj, at one point, he just looked at me and he laughed and he said, Navina, whoever appointed you to be Yamaraj? And we both laughed, because oftentimes we become these self-appointed judges or analysts or holders of the Holy Grail. Just like you walk on the street, and Srila Prabhupada writes that the dogs, they have self-appointed themselves to be the watchdogs and the guardians of the neighborhood. And they just bark at anything that moves, even though it's just a nuisance, it's just a disturbance. So we have to ensure that not similar things will happen in our own lives and in our own communities, that our tendency of Ishvara Bhav to control and to criticize gets out of bounds. Just like in Chaitanya Charitamrita, we mentioned Damodar Pandit, there were others also who were very eager to criticize the Lord. And even though Mahaprabhu accepted it because it was done out of love and out of loving concern and out of dedication, still, because it was not appropriate, because the Supreme Lord and the spiritual master should not be admonished or chastised, he taught them a lesson in various ways, like by sending Damodar Pandit to Navadvip. So we ought to understand, what is my position? Is it my service to take action, or should I just maybe defer to another person? Maybe just say, okay, this is the scenario, please deal with it adequately. And then in regards to dealing with the individual, I have seen personally that kindness, support, understanding, and showing the proper example, good association, engaging people in service is much more productive than to try to chastise or punish or even ban a person. Those are the stronger forms of kindness that have to be the tough love that has to be administered by appropriate authorities in appropriate ways. So these are some reflections on the topic. I hope that helps. You said you had two questions. Amritananda Prabhu, you want to unmute yourself? I think you had two.
Sorry, Prabhu. Thank you. That was very nicely explained. Prabhu, the second question you mentioned, book distribution is just the first part of the process. Second is actually developing relationship and influencing them with our behavior, to show that we care. It's not you give the book and you forget about it. Try to keep contact, so and so forth. Prabhu, now all of us are at different states of realization, of purification. Now, someone who's very pure, if I may call that, immediately he can influence someone. They are spontaneously attractive. But for a person who's in this Mishra Bhakti stage, how would we be able to carry out the completion of this process?
Yes, thank you for your important question. The medicine works even if the person does not understand, cannot read the prescription. So it is not our purity, it is the purity of the process. We're giving people Prabhupada's and Krishna's association. Of course, it seems like they're spending time with us, but we are just the messenger. We're just like the mailman who is delivering the mail. So we may or may not be in the know, and to which extent that it depends on our purity, yet the message is pure and it will have its effect. We have seen many people came in touch with the movement, like Bilva Mangal Thakur, who put him in touch with Krishna. Chintamani, what was her job? She was a prostitute. Was she pure? Well, that is arguable. From an external point of view, certainly not. But she gave him some good advice, and he took it up, and his bhakti flourished. So sometimes we think like, oh, I have to first be pure before I can do this. But how do I become pure? By doing the service. So then it's like catch 22, like what came first, the chicken or the egg? So how do I start? Well, you start just by opening the door and stepping out into the unknown. But before that, we get up early, we chant our 16 rounds, we're following 4 regulative principles, we read Prabhupada's books, we eat only prasadam, we associate with devotees, and then we try our level best. And even we may not be knowledgeable. If we are sincere, Prabhupada said, serious and sincere without ulterior motive. These are the 3 qualifications. Then people will become affected. Mahaprabhu himself, he appointed that illiterate Brahmin to be the teacher, the acharya of the Bhagavad Gita. Why? Because his devotion was so attractive that the Lord himself felt attracted by his devotion, by his dedication. One devotee in Bali, he was going around and distributing books, and he told people that before I was a drunkard and a woman hunter, but this book has changed my life. So I think you will also learn something from it. And people appreciate his honesty. Yet if we think ourselves to be as very advanced because we have been around for a few years and we know a few shlokas and we've done a few things, then people will not be that attracted because they will sense that there's the same type of arrogance and hypocrisy and double dealings that they experience in corporate world and in other organized religions. So they will be more reserved. It will take longer time for them to become, to apply themselves to this process. So it really depends on our mood, on our attitude. Sometimes you walk into a store and you want to buy something, but just because of the behavior of the salesperson, you go somewhere else. And it has happened to all of us, right? I know devotees don't go to restaurants or hotels, but sometimes maybe for, if you're in business, you may be forced to do that. And then you see, even though you're hungry or even though you have a certain business to do, because of the attitude or the behavior or the lack thereof, you just leave, you just go somewhere else. The Chinese have a saying that if you don't have a smiling face, don't open a shop or a restaurant. Because people will look in and say, oh, I was hungry before, but right now I don't feel hungry anymore. And they just keep walking. So we have to really look into the mirror and introspect and ask ourselves, would I like to meet this person? If not, why not? What can I change to be more inviting, more friendly, more accommodating? I'm on college campuses many days in the week, and I see there are different groups out there, and they have different strategies of how they try to do outreach and of how they try to connect. And some are screaming and yelling at people. Some are using microphones. Some are waving books or flags or signs at people. And others are just giving out candies, or they're doing games, or, there's all different types of strategies. So we have to really see what works best according to time, place, and circumstance. And then we can judge Phalena parichiyate. By the result, we can see, are we actually having impact? The single sole purpose of the first contact is not to get money, not to get likes, not to become popular, but that this person comes back, that this person wants to have more association. He wants to have the continuation of that experience because the experience was so good that they can't wait to meet a devotee again and to interact. That is the criteria. So right now, honestly speaking, I've been doing this for 4 decades, including 10 years as the Minister of Outreach and Book Distribution. So I can honestly say ISKCON is number 1 in first contact. We're out there in all possible and impossible places. Over 500 million books have been distributed. But when it comes time to follow up, to cultivation, and to harvesting fruits, we are not in the top categories. There are other groups who do way better than we do. So we can learn a lot from them. Also, as far as organizational structure goes, Srila Prabhupada said, look at the Catholic Church. They've been around for 2,000 years. You can learn a thing or two from them. Also, what not to do. So now when we get confused and we think like we should just go corporate model, we should just go franchise model, or we should just go this structure or that structure, we should ask ourselves, is this really what Srila Prabhupada wanted? Is this really what our tradition teaches us? So that we don't make the same mistakes. So there has to be room for constructive dialogue. Otherwise, if it's just, okay, we just looking for janitors, fundraisers, and cheerleaders, then intelligent people will not be attracted. They will say, that's not for me. I'm looking for a place where I'm valued and I can bring in my contribution and I feel I can make a difference. I feel I can have impact. And I believe ISKCON is that movement, and we can accommodate people who are independently thoughtful and self-reliant. We're not just looking for clones and robots and aliens, but we're actually fostering that spirit of teamwork, which means everybody can contribute to their capacity. And in this way, it will become a very beautiful, a very attractive, a very powerful offering. So these are some reflections. Of course, it's up to the local teams to see what is the how we will apply the vision of Srila Prabhupada and formulate our strategy and implement it and assess and train our people so that we don't just end up with a bunch of neophytes, with a bunch of kanishtas who just argue and bicker about, oh, no, I need to be in charge. No, my guru is better than your guru. Oh, no, I need to go and do my own thing now. I hate everybody. Or I don't get enough prestige and recognition. But that we have a group of at least Madhyamadikaris who are Ishvara Tadadineshu Balisheshu Disachucha Prema Maitri Krupa Upaksha Yakaroti Samadhyama. That should be our goal. We should have that group. And in that Sangha, this Tushyanti Charamanticha is very thick, is very intense, and it becomes so attractive that everybody wants to be part of that group. And it's not that, am I part of your group, or are you part of my group, or are we part of someone else's group? There is only one group that's successful in Kali Yuga. That is the Sankirtan movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this whole thing of groupism and guruism is really a distraction and an obstacle. If we can only work with people who are of our own kind because they have the same race or the same language or the same teacher, or they like the same kind of foods, then we'll be very limited. There's 8 billion people on the planet. Right now, African Americans are very favorable to the message. My question is, are we ready for them? I don't think so. Where are our African American leaders? Where are our African American gurus and teachers? They're far and few. So we have to become broad-minded, manisina, and apply these eternal principles and then see how we can actually empower people of different walks of life. And that means I have to be empowered myself. I have to be an instrument in the hands of the spiritual master. Yasya prasadad Bhagavat prasado, yasya prasadam nagadikutopi. I was with His Holiness Chayadvaita Swami in Atlanta a couple of months back, and he told me that I get up every morning and I do the same thing. I just do the same thing. And because of his dedication and because of his steadiness, he has developed a proficiency in his service and a purity of purpose that is very attractive and it is impactful. So just to give that as an example. And that every one of us can emulate that in our own lives. Any other questions? I believe we got 4 minutes left.
Hare Krishna, Guruji. Dandavat Pranam, all worship Srila Prabhupada. Guruji, could you please explain that example you mentioned, the Shanghai, that one devotee donated, one person donated $350,000. It was very inspiring, and keep hearing that's very inspiring.
Actually, he donated $400,000.
Yeah, $400,000.
Yeah. Sponsored 800 sets in Chinese.
Wow.
Just by meeting a devotee in a train station. You know, a train station is kind of not the place where you would think this thing would happen. And on the first encounter, he handed him $50,000 because he saw that devotee was so sincere, so dedicated. And then because the devotee didn't just go and squander the money and, paid some due bills, but he actually delivered the goods. He actually put those sets into libraries and universities, and he got testimonials and pictures and receipts. He gave him full documentation. There was accountability. So the person's faith, his shraddha grew, became nishta, and he said, okay, here. And he gave him 350,000 more to distribute 800 sets. So that can happen to anyone. Rupa and Sanatan did not build temples. They were just writing books and worshiping their Thakur, their Lord. But aspiring disciples and merchants and statesmen, they became so attracted by their devotion that they came and they offered help. The Goswamis never saw the completion of their temples. It took a long time to build those temples. They were not interested in brick and mortar. They were interested in preaching. Yes, we need temples for the public because people need to see some nice structure and place where they can congregate. But for preachers, they can sit under a tree or in a van. They're not. The Prabhupada said, I have so many palaces, but I can only stay a few days in each place. And I'm an old man. How much can I eat? So we have to have a sense of detachment. Like I believe even in the Swaminarayan group, the person who builds the temple is not the one who will manage it. He has to go somewhere else. And then another person comes and manages it. Just so that we don't become attached to our position or to our place. Of course, we want continuity. We want a sense of responsibility and the sense of, because proprietorship turns sand into gold. But ultimately, we have to understand, Nirmama, nothing is mine. I came yesterday, tomorrow I'll be gone. I'm just here for a couple of hours to do some service. So if in the name of service, I do disservice, then what is the quality of my service? If I step on others or if I neglect others, and this is not meant as a criticism to any of the devotees here or any of the leaders. These are just general comments on this subject, because we can look into our own lives and we see that sometimes maybe these traits are there in my own heart. Maybe sometimes in the name of service, I will do this service. Sometimes because I'm not very mindful, instead of being part of the solution, I'm part of the problem and I'm actually blocking. Of course, we know that nobody can cover the sun. Nobody can obstruct the Sankirtan movement. It will go on. Yet we should be mindful and learn these lessons from Chaitanya Charitamrita and the Bhagavatam. That's why we're having these discussions. So I believe our time is up. We have one last hand that is raised here. Nirada would like to contribute something.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Thank you so much for your beautiful enlightenment class. Absolutely relevant for us. My question today is, you were talking about how we need to have a sangha of madhyamas. At least that's what Prabhupada also envisioned. And then he was saying, we have enough devotees, now we need to really churn, boil the milk. As in, we need to, we should not dilute and just have, just go for those, just kind of expanding the movement and having people who are not really having deep faith and just like a lukewarm kind of a thing, but then people who are having deep faith who can actually preach and then also have a nice understanding of how to deal with other Vaishnavas. So my question is, when it comes to following this instruction, we can just work on ourselves. While as the people who, the other devotee that we are dealing with, some of them they just they leave the temple and then they go. So my question is, are we also contributing to that, or is it the choice that the devotee is making? It's between them and Krishna, right?
It is always 50-50. It is always 50-50. Srila Prabhupada said if somebody leaves, we should consider it 50% our fault. Certainly that free will is always there in the living entity. Anybody can walk out the door any day of the week. But oftentimes they walk out because either of a lack of care, a lack of attention, some impersonalism has crept in, or there was some event, something that occurred that upset them, that really made them feel uncomfortable. So we should try to right the wrongs, like in the story of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who came to install a deity, and he did not see a certain devotee, and he called for that devotee, and he said, in fact, that without that devotee, I will not install the deity. So they went looking for him. One devotee, they told him that the brahmachari, he had some inappropriate dealing with some lady, and then they addressed it, and he left. They thought it's a minor thing. But Maharaj, he said, we can't install the deity if this person doesn't come back. So they went looking for him. They knew he was good at fixing watches. So they looked in different places. And one devotee found him in a watch store. And he said, Gurudev is calling for you. He misses your association. Please come back. So he was so touched, he came back. And later on, he became the acharya. He became the sannyasi, and he's the acharya of that mat. Which also means that, yes, people can make mistakes. They can be mistakes of judgments. They can be mistakes of behavior. But if a person is ready to work on themselves, we should not hold it against them. We should not try to sanction them or ban them, or that's only for very severe cases. If a person becomes super hostile and becomes a threat to themselves and to others. Otherwise, we should try to make it work. So our mood should always be what went wrong. Like I travel around the world, and I deal with a lot of devotees of all walks of life. Some who are inside the institution and some are outside an institution. And, you get feedback, and we have to take on that feedback and not fight back, but extract the essence and see, okay, maybe we could improve a few things, and we could, do things in a better way. That's where community comes into place, that you have elders, you have grandparents, you have people who are wise, who have walked the path, who have been through life, and they are there to counsel, to guide, and to accommodate. And also, if things go wrong, then there should be a way of grievance and a way of how to rectify the situation. Of course, sometimes people, they just have an agenda, or they are in the modes, so they get carried away by the modes of material nature. But we know that any step in bhakti is to their eternal benefit, and eventually they will come back. But we should make it easy for them to come back. If we publicize their mistake, Prabhupada one time said, one sannyasi, he fell down, and somebody was publicizing it, and Prabhupada said, now he can't come back because his reputation is ruined, and everybody, he cannot come back. You have made it impossible for him to come back. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had a secret farm in South India where sannyasis who had difficulties were put on probation for a year or two. They had to do simple seva, eat simple foods, no servants, and if they took the medicine, after a year or two, they were reinstituted in their position. Otherwise, they were sent home. Nobody knew about this farm. Nobody knew about this procedure. But Sundarananda Vidya Vinod, who was the secretary, he wrote to Bhaktisiddhanta, and this record is there. It's there in the BRC in Calcutta. And he said, please relieve me of this service of having to manage this farm, because I know all the dirt of all the people in the institution, and it's weighing heavily on my mind. Please allow me to give me leave from this service so I'm not troubled by all these events. So we have to also understand we're dealing in the mature world, and there are a lot of curveballs. There's a lot of different, we can read the Bhagavatam and we see there's a lot of stuff that goes sideways. And it's easy to overshoot the target. So let us be exemplary by our own example, not just by our own behavior, but also by our kindness, by our compassion, by our tolerance. Sometimes we're very tolerant with newcomers, but very intolerant with devotees. We're very critical, very judgmental with devotees. And that can hurt, that can upset relationships. So much so that people will feel, hey, with friends like this, who needs enemies, let me go somewhere else and mind my own business. We should always feel that this is my family, this is my Sangha. These are the people I'm ready to not just contribute, but I'm ready to sacrifice for. So thank you all for giving me this opportunity to be with you. I pray that you will be empowered to carry forward the torch of Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan movement and to have impact and to create this beautiful and expand this beautiful Sankirtan mission in your area. Thank you very much. Shri Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Vanchakalpatarascha, Kripasubhevachcha, Haribo, August Prabhupada, Haribo.
Thank you,
Thank
Prabhu.
you, Nirada Prabhu, for giving
Thank you so
enlightenment.
much.
All of wonderful points you have brought up for us to reflect and act upon it. Thank you so much. All glories to you. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Sunday feast program in the evening, 5:30 to 8:30. Please join us. Then May 3rd, Tuesday, is Akshaya Tritiya, a very, very auspicious day. And Chandana Yatra starts. We may not be celebrating Chandana Yatra, but Akshaya Tritiya, they will be celebrated in some form or the other. Very auspicious day to a lot of services, to begin new things, new programs. And May 14th is Narsinga Chaturdasi, next biggest festival. Narsinga Chaturdasi, May 14th, Saturday, fasting dusk. And then May 15th is also an important day. Purnima, Madhavendra Puri's appearance, Acharya's appearance. The lunar eclipse is there, May 15th. So those are the quick announcements. Govindas is on. If you'd like to be added to the Govinda WhatsApp group, let us know. But you can place your orders, govindasnj.com. So those are the quick announcements. Madhava Prabhu, anything else?
No, thank you very much. Quick announcement, we'll be starting our Govinda's buffet. We'll be there next Saturday from 12 to 3. All you can eat lunch buffet. Physically at the temple. So you're most welcome. Invited to participate. Any other community questions? Okay. We'll see you all in the evening. Hari Hari.
Thank you all for joining. Hare Krishna. Jai Gaur Bhakta.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you, everybody. Hari Bol, Hare Krishna.
Mancha kalpatarubhascha kripa sindhu bhayavacha patitanam pavane bhayo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha vaishnavita ki jai.